When I was younger, I'm talking about 12, there was a bowling alley down the block that my friends and I would frequent on the weekends. The bowling alley has been closed for years, but when it was open, it was incredibly inexpensive and ideal for a group of young teens without their own money. On this particular weekend, I went to the bowling alley with my friends Jacob, Josh, and Mikey. We always went at night, probably around 8 p.m. On weekends, the bowling alley was usually packed, and sometimes we would run across familiar faces. On the adult side of the lane, there was an elderly guy who occasionally bowled by himself. The reason we noticed that man was that he occasionally just strangely wandered down the entire bowling alley, passing every lane while observing people bowling, and then we noticed that he ended up back at his lane by himself. We called him Creeper. Where alcohol was served, we always played on the non-alcoholic side. After perhaps the third time we saw him tonight, a lane opened up next to us. And guess what? He was sitting there by himself, setting up a game, and soon after he began attempting to strike up a conversation with us. He began making comments about our form and occasionally interrupting our conversation to tell us strange things like how long he's been coming here. Eventually, he said something really strange that he watches us play every weekend from across the bowling alley, and he decided to come over and introduce himself. Tonight, he played it off as though he was attempting to be some sort of bowling instructor to us, but in reality, it was just annoying and uncomfortable. I was up to ball when Bob once came into our lane and used his hands to grab my wrist in an allegedly better position. I never allowed him to touch me, and I didn't ask for his advice. We were only about 13, but none of us stood up and said, "I'll get lost," or anything like that. I could feel my friend's uneasiness every time that man touched me, and I became more and more disgusted. As a result, we ended our night at the bowling alley early, spending the money we would have spent on more games or pizza. Instead, we went to a pizza place farther out the block, where Jacob and Mikey went their separate ways because they lived on a different block. Josh and I then turned around and headed back toward our houses when we heard a car engine start. We saw an old SUV, possibly a Ford Explorer, making a three-point turn, and we both thought it might be Creeper. As we were walking down the street, Bob the SUV began to slowly follow us. Then, as we pulled up alongside him, the window rolled down, and it turned out to be the man from the bowling alley. He said out the window that he could give us a ride home, but we said no, thank you. He said, "It's not safe for a couple of kids to be walking around late at night, and we weren't even that young. We were young teenagers, not little kids, and it was crazy that he thought we were young enough to trick into getting into a car." Josh and I made the decision to start jogging home, and when we got to the crossroads where we had parted ways, we said our goodbyes, and I kept running until I was exhausted. It's not a good idea to run after eating pizza. My dad was already asleep because he worked weekends, and my mom was probably out with her girlfriends, and my sister was too. So I went around back to get the key to the back door, which was hidden in the shed. When I got out of the shed, I thought I heard something, and I should have followed my instincts. I went to the back door to unlock it, and before I could turn around completely, someone pushed me inside the house, covering my mouth and wrapping their arm around my neck. I couldn't see who it was because I couldn't turn my head, so I scratched and clawed at the man's hand until I could move my mouth just enough out of his grasp and scream, "Dad!" Even though I was only 13, I managed to fight hard enough to get him to let go of me a few times so I could scream, which definitely scared him away. When he finally let go for good, I ran outside without turning around and ran up the half-flight of stairs to the main floor, calling for my dad. My dad came running out of his room after I told him what had happened, and after telling him about it, he checked the backyard and the entire property. When he returned inside, I told him about the man from the bowling alley and how we called him Creeper. The crazy thing is that, although technically I can't say with 100% certainty that the man who came in behind me and grabbed me wasn't the man from the bowling alley, in practice, it's extremely unlikely that it wasn't him. Bob followed Joshi and his SUV after confessing to stalking us there. My dad filed a police report and attempted to get the bowling alley to release the video surveillance from that night, but they refused. I was never permitted to return there after my mom learned about this. Not that I would ever want to. I grew up in a northern New Jersey suburb, so I suppose you could say that we were just spoiled kids with nothing better to do. Looking back, the way we passed the time was a little silly, but there's nothing I can do about it now. Anyway, one of the things we really enjoyed doing as teenagers was going exploring in the late hours of the night. Usually we explored abandoned buildings, but not always. We were actually expelled from our middle school for jumping through an open window, but that's a tale for another time. There were 5 of us, including me, Chip, and we were intending to carry out a riskier operation this specific evening. Anish Rowan and Jason Rowan had a habit of switching jobs frequently, which was kind of a joke in our squad. He led jobs as soon as he got them, usually for the silliest reasons. For example, he had recently accepted a job as an attendant at a bowling alley a few towns over from us, and you could probably see where this was going. He had been given the key to shut down the establishment the previous evening. Anish was a master of persuasion, and he managed to get Rowan to allow us to explore the bowling alley at around 3 in the morning. The 5 of us decided to get a little tipsy before heading out, and we all had a good amount to drink, with the exception of Jason, who wouldn't go anywhere unless he was the one driving. His dad had a really nice BMW, and Jason liked being able to cut off our connections when he got tired after getting a little tipsy. I'm telling you, Anish could persuade someone to give them their kidney because he was so persistent. I haven't heard from him in a long time, and I believe he may be in jail right now. I am not proud of being the squad's heavy drinker, but it's just who I was at the time, so I usually took things a little less seriously than I should have, especially in risky or dangerous situations. James drove the 5 of us to the location. Chip, who was usually the most cautious, kept reminding us to be careful in his hilariously high-pitched voice as Rowan unlocked the door and the 5 of us entered. We were all a little upset when Rowan told us that we couldn't do any bowling at the moment, so I had the brilliant idea to do some makeshift sliding on the lanes as if they were slip slides because we were intoxicated. This was actually quite enjoyable. The 5 of us quickly became exhausted and made the decision that we wanted to explore. We asked Rowan if there were any back rooms we could check out, and he said that there were. We then entered the employee-only area, and Rowan led us to a storage room. We began fumbling around and flipping things over because we were foolish and careless, figuring that Rowan would be fired anyhow, so we weren't too concerned with messing up. As we began to get bored, we heard a deafening bump from below, and the 5 of us froze, staring at one another. Jason, the only sober person in the group, inquired if the establishment had a basement. Rowan revealed that he had no previous information of a possible basement and seems as astonished as we were. Chip seemed rather anxious, informing us that we were likely going to get Rowan fired. We were whispering now, debating whether or not we wanted to go seek for this imaginary basement. Anish smiled, ready to continue investigating. I doubt any of us really wanted to go down there, but Jason made the first move in his trademark level-headed manner, throwing the latch open and staring down at the old rusted ladder leading into the darkness. Screw this, whispered Chip, motioning for us to leave. At that moment, Jason lifted the edge of a rug nestled in the corner, revealing a hatch. We were shocked, and the atmosphere in the room instantly changed with the realization that the situation was now serious, even if we had found the way into the basement. Ignoring him, Jason headed for the stairs, took out his phone, and shone the flashlight into the darkness before descending into the abyss without saying another word. I could tell that Rowan, Anish, and Chip were a little scared, which makes sense, but I still had a lot of liquid confidence, so I decided to go anyway. Anish followed me, and Rowan brought up the rear. Chip refused to come down with us, so we all four of us took out our phone flashlights and started looking around the basement, which had been hidden for some reason. It was filled with dust and cardboard boxes stacked to the ceiling, or at least that's what we initially thought. Anish spotted a door in the corner and we walked over to it. Jason put his hand on the handle, but just as he was about to open it, we heard a distinctive bump from the other side that sounded exactly like the one we heard earlier. We all looked around at each other with horrified expressions on our faces, and I could tell that we were thinking the same thing. At this time, I was really spooked out and turned to go like a fool. Jason smashed the door open to reveal another storage room, but that wasn't all there was. In the corner of the room, there was a human figure sitting on the ground with its legs crossed and facing away from us. After a full minute of silence, the person in the corner banged their head against the wall, explaining the noises we had been hearing. I started to tiptoe to the ladder, being careful not to make any noise, and my friends turned around doing the same. At that moment, they were obviously filled with terror. Rowan stumbled over something on the floor, swore, shouted at the person in the room, and we fled. In an instant, Jason and I were climbing the ladder, and in a nook nearby, Chip was bent down, listening with interest. We heard Rowan yell to get off me, but Anish and Jason were too scared to look around, so we all three fled the room once Anish made it up. When I returned, I saw Chip throwing a metal pipe down the hatch, followed by a demonic scream. Chip grasped Rowan's wrist and pulled him up as he clambered up the ladder. Chip slammed the hatch shut as Rowan came toward me, and the five of us hurried out of the bowling alley. Rowan quickly secured the door with trembling hands. After the rest of us climbed the ladder, it appeared that whoever had been in the basement leaped on Rowan's back and clawed at him. Chip saved his life and used that pipe to nudge Rowan's attacker in the head, sending the madman reeling backward. Jason drove us back with a blank expression on his face, and we listened as Rowan explained what had happened. We still don't know how that guy got down there. Perhaps there was another entrance we missed, but in any case, the basement had been purposefully hidden, which suggests that Rowan's boss may have known something about the entire situation. Rowan claimed he only briefly saw the man's face, which was the horrifying face of an old, homeless, and filthy man with a bird's nest of hair on his head. Rowan ended up leaving the following day without explaining anything to his boss, because what we had done was unquestionably illegal. My girlfriend Rebecca and I decided one night that going bowling would be fun. So we drove to the closest bowling alley and went through the entire process of renting shoes, finding balls, and choosing a lane. This experience destroyed my taste for bowling, which I haven't done since. We were both really bad at it. We played for an hour of bowling because neither of us had done it in a long time. Rebecca wasn't having much fun since she kept getting gutter balls, and I was only somewhat better than her, so I wasn't really able to assist her much, which made things worse. Rebecca turned aside, reluctant to even glance in that direction, as her ex-boyfriend and his group of friends came and began bowling a few lanes down from us. I believe her ex saw me at the front desk, so I turned aside when she whispered to me that we needed to go, so we packed up early and left. She then walked to the vehicle and waited while I returned the shoes. I didn't tell Rebecca this, but when we got home, we decided to play Wii bowling and open a bottle of wine because it sounded much more enjoyable anyhow. The trip to the bowling alley was a failure, but I didn't want her to be upset, so we played Wii bowling for about 30 minutes while listening to music in the background and drinking wine. After the current song ended, we heard something come from upstairs, and Rebecca and I looked at each other, telling me she heard it too. I turned off the music permanently. But now there was nothing but silence, and the sound we heard could be best described as a heavy object being dropped on the floor. I went upstairs to investigate, checking every bedroom with the lights on and under every bed. I was relieved to find nothing, but of course you have to go investigate if you hear a suspicious sound in your home. After maybe another 30 minutes of playing Wii bowling, we brought our little wine party upstairs to the bedroom, and eventually we fell asleep. Since Rebecca is a lightweight, she got much drunker than I did, which explains why I woke up in the middle of the night and not her. I heard what woke me up, though, and it was another distinct and clear sound of something heavy being dropped from above. But now that we were upstairs, what else could be above us? The attic, I carefully left my bedroom to avoid waking anybody up, since the attic door is just outside my bedroom door. It's one of those doors with the rope that you pull down and a metal ladder comes down. Rebecca. Every 5 seconds or so, while I stood under the attic door, I heard the smallest creaking sound, which seemed to be caused by the weight of something shifting. I didn't want to frighten Rebecca, but I had heard of animals entering people's attics, so sometimes I went to get a broom from the closet in case I needed to defend myself. If I had to, I would stealthily unlock the attic door and climb up. In the dark, I paused at the top of the ladder and listened to the creaking sound. It was the wooden rocking chair. We had a rocking chair up there, and I almost fell down the ladder when I used my phone as a light to show that someone was seated in it, rocking gently. The guy turned to face me when I had the confidence to ask, "Who are you?" The shaking stopped, and I wanted to rush back to Rebecca and hide. I rushed down the ladder and shoved the attic door open as soon as he began making this animalistic growling noise. I yelled for Rebecca to contact the police. I remained under the attic door until I heard her recognize me. The guy inside attempted to kick the door open, but he ultimately stopped, and I heard the insane laughing of a mentally ill person who talked in a foreign language. When the cops eventually came, I felt as if my arms would break from holding up the attic door since it sounded so Russian. The police officers had to go up there and take the guy out, so Rebecca walked downstairs to allow them in. Sitting on the sofa next to each other, Rebecca and I waited in the living room until we saw them escorting the guy to the front door in handcuffs. The guy was clearly a dangerous, mentally ill person based on the way he stared at me. His mouth twisted in a manner that would nearly give the impression that he was intoxicated, and his gaze was filled with rage, madness, and a tinge of bewilderment. We didn't file civil charges against him, but if they hadn't determined that he was mad, I'm sure he was charged with a crime. He probably got through one of the backyard windows, since this happened in the summer, when we have the windows open. I'm not sure why he picked our house. Maybe he simply happened to stumble onto the unlucky residence.